When we think about nations holding gold, we correctly assume that it's the central banks of those countries that have the gold. But here in the United States, it is very different. We have the most gold, but it is not held by the central bank of the United States of America. Should it be, and can it be? We'll try to answer those questions in this video as we explore. Gold being that store of value. How is it stored here in the United States? Well, it is stored in the vaults that are owned by the U.S. Treasury. And that is something that is somewhat controversial, but we're going to take a look and a deeper dive in this from lawliberty.org and answer some questions. And we're going to go through some history in this video as well as the wheels of time continue to spin. We're going to try to find out exactly what this is about. Since the 6th century BC, the reign of Croesus of Lydia refined gold as served as a monetary store of value. Today, many central banks, including the European Central Bank, the Swiss Central Bank, and the German Bundesbank, the Bank of France, the Bank of Italy, the Dutch National Bank, the Bank of Japan, etc., all of them hold gold as an investment and reserve against their monetary liabilities. It may surprise some that in contrast, the Federal Reserve, which is our central bank, holds no gold at all. The original 1913 Federal Reserve Act required the Fed to hold substantial amounts of gold to back its outstanding Federal Reserve notes and member bank deposits. In 1934, the Roosevelt administration pushed for and Congress passed legislation that made it illegal for U.S. persons, including the Federal Reserve, to hold gold for monetary purposes. Fed resistance notwithstanding, it was required by law to hand over all of its gold to the U.S. Treasury. The last link between gold and the U.S. dollar was severed in 1971, August specifically, and all legal prohibitions against U.S. persons buying, selling, and holding gold were repealed shortly thereafter. 50-some-odd years later, many U.S. citizens and financial organizations hold gold investments, but the Federal Reserve cannot and has not owned any gold since then. This raises two interesting questions. Can they actually do it? They've not done it, but can they actually do it now? Can they legally buy, sell, and hold gold? And if it is permissible, should they do it? Well, let's look back and get a little bit of history, the history of gold, as well as the dollar as we know it today. And this may help provide a little bit of insight as to whether or not this can happen. From 1900 to 1933, a U.S. dollar was legally redeemable for 25.8 grains of gold, 9/10 fine, or $20.67 per fine troy ounce of gold, as measured by this coin right here. That was kind of the standard bearer, the $20 gold piece. On April the 5th, 1933, 1 month after taking office, as part of his emergency actions in the financial and economic crisis following the temporary closing of all banks, Franklin Roosevelt, the president, issued an executive order that prohibited American individuals, partnerships, associations, or corporations from owning so-called hoarding gold. The order required all Americans to turn in their gold to Federal Reserve Bank, where with criminal penalties for violations receiving in exchange paper dollars at the official price of $20.67 per troy ounce. This radical executive action was subsequently endorsed in a joint congressional resolution and later in statute. And the executive order was 6102, quite famous for sure, and how that has played out. That year, Congress also passed the Emergency Farm Mortgage Act of 1933. Part 8 of that law empowered the president by proclamation to fix the weight of the gold dollar and grains to 9/10 fine, and also to fix the weight of the silver dollar and grains 9/10 fine at a fixed ratio in relation to the gold dollar as in such amounts as he finds necessary, but in no event shall the weight of the gold dollar be fixed so as to reduce its present weight by more than 50%. President Roosevelt soon exercised this power with the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. It required the Federal Reserve banks to send all of their gold to the Treasury in exchange for gold certificates with a fixed dollar denominated value of $20.67 per fine troy ounce of gold transferred to the Treasury. These certificates, still on the balance sheets of the Fed today, cannot be redeemed for gold. The 1934 Act reaffirmed the legal prohibition against Americans owning gold for monetary or investment purposes and further required that circulating gold coins be withdrawn and melted into gold bars, ended gold coinage, and suspended the domestic redemption of U.S. currency in gold. The day after the passage of the Gold Reserve Act, in January 1934, and the transfer of all Federal Reserve gold to the Treasury, President Roosevelt increased the official price of gold to $35 per troy ounce. You see what's happened there, and it gives you a little insight. The dollar became worth only 15.236 grains of gold, 9/10 fine, or just 59% of the dollar's 1933 value in terms of its legal weight of gold. This generated a large dollar-denominated profit for the Treasury, a profit that would otherwise have belonged to the Fed. Since 1934, the U.S. legal price of gold has been increased twice, but now bears no resemblance to gold's market price. In 1972, the U.S. legal price was raised from $35 to $38 per fine troy ounce. Then in 1973, it was raised again to $42.2222. Today, the market price of gold is about $2,700 per troy ounce, or thereabouts. But still officially on the books, gold is still at $42.22. There are 480 grains of pure gold in a fine troy ounce, with gold trading about $2,700 per ounce. $1 US is worth 0.192 grains of pure gold. In terms of grains of gold, the present day US dollar buys less than 1% of the amount that a 1933 dollar would buy. And in reality, when you look at through the course of time, that leads that the dollar has lost essentially about 98% of its value compared to where it was in 1913. Valued by gold, it's 99% loss of value. Said differently, a penny in 1933 was worth more in terms of its weight in gold than a dollar is today. In 1971, President Nixon severed the last tie between gold and the value of the U.S. dollar by ending the post-World War II Bretton Woods Agreement. And actually, that was in World War II, 1944. The war wasn't over yet. And that gave foreign governments the option to redeem dollars for gold at the official price. Subsequently, Congress passed legislation repealing the sections of the Gold Exchange Act that made it illegal for Americans to own gold. President Gerald Ford revoked Roosevelt's 1933 executive order in 1974. Federal Reserve notes the circulating currency of the United States by law must still be fully collateralized by the Feds, but they are not redeemable for anything except for other Federal Reserve notes, an equivalent value in coins that have no intrinsic metallic value or deposit liability in the Fed, although I do disagree with that about the intrinsic value of copper, which is in most of our coins today. The Fed's founders would be appalled by the collateral backing of U.S. currency does not include any gold. Many central banks have substantial investments in gold. According to the World Gold Council, the above-ground global stock of gold is approximately 212.58 million kilos, about 15.4% of which is owned by central banks and national treasuries. Many central banks have experienced significant gains in their holdings of gold reserves as the market price of gold more than doubled in the past 6 years. In some cases, recent revaluation of gains of central bank gold investments have offset losses on central bank investments in long-term fixed-rate bonds. According to IMF working paper, central banks hold gold because it is seen as a safe haven, regarded as respectable and confidence-inspiring, is liquid, provides portfolio diversification, and has historically been a reliable store of value, a hedge against inflation, a hedge against unanticipated systemic shocks to financial liability. And in a 2023 interview, Art Hoeben, director of the finance market division of the Dutch National Bank, explained it as this: "The beauty of gold is that it retains its value. That's one of the reasons why central banks hold gold. Gold has intrinsic value unlike a dollar or any other currency, let alone Bitcoin. It's a fungible product. It's a liquid product. You can buy it and sell it almost anywhere in the world. Gold is like solidified confidence for the central bank. If we ever unexpectedly have to create a new currency or systemic risk arises, the public can have confidence in the Dutch National Bank because for whatever money we issue, we can back it up with the same value in gold. If everything collapses, then the value of those gold reserves shoots up." They've also likened it to an anchor of trust, and I think that is one of the best ways to describe what gold is. The IMF paper discusses how in recent years the Central Bank of Russia, China, India, and Turkey have purchased significant amounts of gold in response to the sanctions by the West. Sanctioned countries' central bank face restrictions on selling reserves held in U.S. dollars, euro, and yen securities. Gold held outside of the owner's country can be impounded. Sanctioned national central banks have responded by buying significant amounts of gold and holding it domestically. So can the Fed own gold today? The Fed owns no gold or other assets to hedge the interest rate risk of its long maturity fixed rate securities. The post-COVID-19 inflation required the Fed to substantially increase interest rates, which generated more than $1 trillion in unrealized market value losses to its huge fixed-rate securities portfolio. In addition, it has nearly $200 billion in actual accumulated cash operating losses. With hindsight being 2020, it's clear that the Federal Reserve System could have avoided some of those losses if, instead of investing only in fixed-rate long-term securities, it had diversified and included some gold in its investment portfolio. But could it have done so? The current Federal Reserve Act, as amended, still explicitly states that only Federal Reserve Bank in its open market operation has the power to deal in gold coin and bullion at home or abroad. The provisions of the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, which made it illegal for U.S. persons, including the Federal Reserve, to hold gold for investment or monetary purposes, were repealed long ago. Specifically, the Par Value Modification Act of 1973 repealed Sections 3 and 4 of the Gold Reserve Act, the section that prohibits U.S. citizens and Federal Reserve banks from buying and holding gold, which was signed in August of 1974, provided that after December the 31st of that year, no provision of any law in effect and the date of enactment of this act and no rule, regulation, or order in effect may be construed to prohibit any person from purchasing, holding, selling, or otherwise dealing in gold in the United States or abroad. Moreover, President Ford issued Executive Order 11825 on December the 31st, 1974, formally revoking President Roosevelt's Executive Order 6102, which prohibits Americans from hoarding gold. These provisions of the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 that suspended citizens' right to redeem the Federal Reserve notes for gold at the official price, however, remain in place. Since the legal meaning of any persons includes a Federal Reserve Bank, in plain language reading of the legislation suggests the Federal Reserve banks can today buy, hold, or sell gold without limitations in course of their open market operations and have been able to do so since the 1st of January 1975. So we think that they can, according to this, but should they do it? The Federal Reserve is a unique central bank as the sole issuer of the world's dominant fiat or pure paper currency. The global holding of fiat dollars is a great advantage to the U.S. Treasury, famously and accurately characterized by the French in the 1960s as an exorbitant privilege in financing the U.S. government. At the time of the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, the chief negotiator, Harry Dexter White, argued, "To us and to the world, the United States dollar and gold are synonymous." In 1924, the price of gold and the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar are more like opposites. Does the Fed's reluctance to hold gold reflect ideological resistance within the Fed and the Treasury to reestablish a distant link between gold and the U.S. dollar, even if gold ownership offered advantages for the Fed and the country's finances. The Fed's use of debt securities for open market operations has a direct impact on market interest rates, be they short-term Treasury, long-term Treasury, or repo rates, or the rates paid on government-guaranteed mortgage-backed securities, including gold as an instrument of open market operations, would provide the Fed a means of increasing or decreasing bank reserves independent of any direct effect on market interest rates. If conducted at scale, of course the Fed gold dealings would impact the market price of gold and revenues of gold purchasers. One possible problem is that the U.S. legal price of gold was set by statute more than 50 years ago. If the Fed bought gold at $2,700 per ounce, would it value the gold on its financial statements at its legal price of $42.22 per ounce? Or would the Fed's power to set its own accounting standards allow it to value gold at its current market price or at a historical cost? In the future, when the Fed regains profitability, the accounting treatments of unrealized capital gains of gold would be in part to determine the Fed's required remittance of the Treasury once the Fed surplus exceeds its legal maximum of $6.785 billion. Could the Fed do the same other central banks book gold at historic costs and retain unrealized gains as a hidden reserve? Conversely, how would the Fed account for unrealized decreases in the market of gold? It's curious that few experts seem to know for certain whether it's legal for the Fed to use gold as an instrument of open market operations. It is also puzzling why there's little or any discussion of the potential benefits of or cost of using gold as a tool of monetary policy as a Federal Reserve asset. And they think, the authors of this piece, that they merit serious discussion. Well, I can answer that question extremely easily. It's apparent and obvious to me. They don't need to. They don't have to. They're not constrained. They don't want to be constrained by gold. Gold means nothing to them, even if it doubles in price right now, because they indeed have the top reserve currency on the planet. And they're going to milk that for all it's worth. It's golden. The dollar already is golden compared to any other currency out there. I hate to say it, but that is the case. So I think that probably the Federal Reserve doesn't need to, nor should it, constrain itself with gold in any way, shape, or form, or tie it, or bring it closer to the dollar. The Federal Reserve holding gold would cause just that. It would bring a closer tie to the dollar and gold, and they want to keep it separated. There's a song about that somewhere. Anyways, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. If you made it this far, you're one of the few who watch this video. Every time I pull out the old turntable, the views plummet on this channel, even though it's a great display, and most people that do watch enjoy it. I do it for you. So if you can, share this video and like this broadcast as well too. Press that like button down below. It helps get the word out there. Appreciate it. So I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to watch, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.